The day David Vance signed my name onto a patent assignment form, he didn't even look me in the eye. He just tapped his expensive gold watch. He pointed at the security guard waiting by my desk. And he said, "You are an asset, Julian, and assets get replaced." He thought he was wiping his hands clean of a quiet, tired chemical engineer who would never fight back. What David did not know was that the blue leather ledger sitting in his private office safe was not the only copy. I had spent 3 long years documenting every shortcut, every illegally dumped toxin, and every bribe that built his pharmaceutical empire. David Vance spent 20 years building a legacy on my sweat and silence. It took me 18 months to tear it down to absolute ash, without ever stepping foot back into his building. If you have ever sat in silence while someone took credit for your hard work, or if you have ever dreamed of serving absolute justice to a toxic boss who thought they were untouchable, hit that like button, subscribe, and buckle in. Today's story is a masterclass in patient, methodical revenge. My name is Julian Hayes. For 8 years, I was the lead research chemist at Vance Biotech. It was a mid-sized pharmaceutical laboratory, nestled in the damp, industrial outskirts of Oregon. To the outside world, David Vance was a self-made titan, a philanthropist, a man who appeared on local news broadcasts in tailored charcoal suits, talking about pioneering breakthroughs for humanity. But inside the walls of Vance Biotech, David was a tyrant who ran the facility on terror and manipulation. He specifically targeted young, desperate engineers fresh out of grad school. People like me, who had mountain loads of student debt, families to support, and nowhere else to go. He offered us decent starting salaries. But the moment you signed your employment contract, the trap snapped shut. Tucked deep inside page 14 of our hiring paperwork was a non-compete clause. It was so broad, it effectively banned you from working in the chemical industry anywhere in North America, for 5 years if you left. You either stayed and swallowed his verbal abuse, or you quit and faced immediate financial ruin. For 7 long years, I swallowed it. I worked 80-hour weeks in a windowless subterranean lab that smelled perpetually of cold bleach and burnt rubber. My hair started thinning at 28. My health slowly began to deteriorate from constant exhaustion. My longtime girlfriend eventually walked out on me because I was never home. And when I was home, I was just a hollow shell staring blankly at chemical formula sheets. But I endured every single indignity because of Project Aegis. Aegis was my baby. It was a synthetic compound designed to dramatically lower inflammation in chronic autoimmune patients, without the devastating organ toxicity of traditional steroids. It was not just another corporate assignment to me. It was my life's work. My own mother had suffered for decades from severe rheumatoid arthritis. And every single late night I spent in that cold basement, I was fighting for her and millions of people like her. I ran the trials. I calibrated the purity levels. And I spent thousands of frustrating hours solving the stability issues that had stumped 3 previous research teams before me. By the autumn of my 31st year, Aegis was finally ready. The preclinical trial results were nothing short of staggering. We were looking at a revolutionary compound worth tens of millions of dollars. A compound that could save countless lives and change medicine forever. I remember walking into David's corner office on a rainy Tuesday morning, holding the heavy, bound folder of the finalized trial dossier. The air in his top-floor office always smelled expensive, like heavy cedarwood cologne, leather, and polished mahogany. David did not even look up from his digital tablet when I walked in. He just carelessly motioned toward the glass coffee table and told me to put it there. I told him that this was the finalized data. My voice was trembling slightly, from a mixture of raw exhaustion and overwhelming excitement. I told him the stability metrics had passed every stress test, and that we were officially ready for the FDA filing. I looked at him, smiled for the first time in years, and said, "David, we finally did it." David slowly lowered his tablet onto the desk. He leaned back in his high-backed leather chair. He laced his fingers together and looked at me with a cold, terrifying calm. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Correction, Julian. I did it." I froze in place. The room felt suddenly cold. I asked him what he meant by that. He reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a single piece of heavy paper, and slid it slowly across the mahogany. It was an official patent application for Project Aegis. Listed under primary inventor was David Vance. Listed under research assistant, in tiny print at the bottom, was Julian Hayes. Under this agreement, as primary inventor, David retained all commercial licensing rights and royalties. It was a personal windfall estimated at $40 million over the next decade. As a mere assistant, I was entitled to a standard corporate bonus of $5,000 before taxes. I stared at the paper, unable to process the words. I asked him if this was some kind of sick joke. My pulse was hammering like a drum in my throat. I could feel hot blood rushing up my neck. I told him that I wrote every single line of code, that I manually synthesized every trial batch, and that I practically lived in that basement lab for 3 straight years, while he was playing golf. David replied that I was paid a fixed salary to do exactly that. His voice dropped an octave, becoming razor-sharp and deadly quiet. He told me that I used his equipment, his facility, his power, and his capital. He called me an ungrateful employee, and commanded me to learn my place. When I raised my voice and threatened to go to the board of directors, to the regulatory committee, and straight to the local press, David just smiled. It was a slow, cruel, sociopathic smile that reached nowhere near his eyes. He leaned forward across his desk and whispered to go ahead and try it. He promised he would enforce my non-compete agreement before sunset. He said he would sue me for millions for theft of proprietary trade secrets, and he would make sure I was blacklisted so thoroughly that I would never handle a test tube again, even in a middle school classroom. He gave me an ultimatum: take my box and leave today, or accept the $5,000 and keep my mouth shut forever. 2 days later, before I could even gather my thoughts or consult a lawyer, HR called me in. David had fired me anyway, citing fabricated claims of insubordination, theft, and erratic workplace behavior. Armed security guards marched me out of the building in front of 20 of my former peers, holding my entire adult life in a single, flimsy cardboard box. For the first 2 months after that day, I was a living ghost. I sat alone in my small, dimly lit apartment, listening to the Oregon rain beat rhythmically against the window pane. The sheer humiliation was a crushing physical weight on my chest. Every single morning I woke up with my jaws clenched so tight that my teeth and temples ached. David had filed the legal non-compete injunction immediately. I could not even get a basic job at a local coffee shop or a hardware store, without his legal team sending threatening cease and desist letters to test my spirit. He wanted to break me entirely, so I would never have the financial or emotional energy to challenge his stolen patent. Then came the night of November 14th. I was sitting on my worn-out sofa, eating cold soup and watching the local evening news, when David's face suddenly appeared on the screen. He was standing at a grand gala podium in a tailored tuxedo, receiving a golden trophy for Regional Entrepreneur of the Year. The news anchor praised him as a visionary pioneer and a savior of pharmaceutical safety. During his acceptance speech, David looked straight into the news camera, flashed that polished, fake smile, and said that true innovation always requires sacrifice. He said it requires taking the burden entirely onto your own shoulders, when those around you lack the vision, courage, and stamina to finish the race. He was talking about me. He was publicly mocking me on live television, while taking the credit for saving lives. Something deep inside me snapped that night. The lingering grief, the overwhelming panic, and the pathetic self-pity all instantly vaporized. They were replaced by a cold, sharp, crystallizing clarity. David Vance thought I was just a harmless, weak nerd who would fade away into obscurity. He thought because I did not scream or slam doors when he fired me, I was submissive. He mistook my quiet patience for weakness. He forgot one crucial detail. I was the lead chemist. I did not just design the product. I knew how every single machine, pipeline, and dark secret in his entire facility operated. I knew where the financial toxic waste went. I knew which international suppliers he secretly paid off to bypass safety checks. And most importantly, I knew the massive environmental crime he had buried deep in the lower levels of Vance Biotech. To keep his profit margins impossibly high, I decided right then that I would not hire a lawyer. Lawyers play inside crowded courtrooms, where David's endless millions could easily tie me up in appeals for a decade, until I starved on the street. Instead, I chose to play a long, quiet, devastating game. During my 8 years at the company, David had operated a dirty, illegal operation in the abandoned sub-basement to save hundreds of thousands of dollars on hazardous chemical disposal fees for the heavy solvent waste produced during Aegis's synthesis, specifically a highly toxic, carcinogenic compound called tetrahydrofuran B. He had been systematically falsifying environmental compliance reports for over half a decade. Instead of paying certified hazardous waste management teams to haul it away safely, he was secretly storing hundreds of unmapped, unsealed containment drums in an abandoned, flooded storage wing directly beneath Lab 4. I knew this because 3 years prior, I had accidentally discovered the wing and brought it to his attention, naively thinking it was an administrative oversight. David had pulled me into his private office, locked the door, and showed me a blue leather ledger. In that ledger, he personally tracked the real toxic waste volumes versus the completely fake numbers he submitted to the Department of Environmental Quality. He had laughed it off, patted me on the back, and told me that when Aegis goes public, they would use a tiny fraction of the profits to clean it up silently. But until then, it was to stay locked down. And if I ever spoke of it, I would be destroyed. David thought he was the only person alive who had access to those numbers. But David forgot that I possess a near-photographic memory for complex formulas, dates, and measurements. During my time there, I had kept my own meticulous coded lab notes, documenting every single date stamp, batch weight, chemical output, and illegal discharge metric for 8 full years. I did not rush to the authorities right away. If you throw a single hasty punch at a wealthy man, his lawyers will catch it and break your wrist. You have to weave a net so tight, so quiet, and so absolute, that when they finally realize they are caught, their own desperate struggles only pull the stranglehold tighter. I knew David was quietly preparing to sell Vance Biotech to a massive global pharmaceutical conglomerate called Vanguard Life Sciences for a staggering $80 million. The entire acquisition deal hinged on Vance Biotech maintaining a completely spotless regulatory bill of health and securing mandatory federal environmental certification for their facilities before the final contract signing on June 1st. I began working alongside an anonymous, high-profile whistleblower attorney operating out of the state capitol. We did not file a civil lawsuit that could be settled out of court. Instead, we filed a massive sealed federal complaint directly with the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Justice, and the State Department of Environmental Quality. But we timed our submission with absolute, terrifying precision. We did not just supply vague allegations. I provided detailed, high-resolution blueprints, exact GPS coordinates of the sub-basement containment vaults, the precise chemical signature ratios of the illegal waste, and digital copies of the internal transport manifests cross-referenced with fraudulent vendor shipping records. Next, I turned my attention to the stolen patent itself. Project Aegis was a brilliant medical discovery, but it harbored one massive, fundamental flaw that I had deliberately kept hidden in my personal physical notebook, completely away from the company's digital servers. Under specific, subtle temperature fluctuations above 38 degrees Celsius, the active molecular compound degraded rapidly into an inert, entirely useless chemical slurry. In my final months at the lab, I had successfully created the stabilizing catalyst, a delicate secondary compound I referred to in my notes as Molecule 9. David had stolen my initial patent filing, but he did not possess Molecule 9 because I had never typed it into the lab database. He, arrogant as he was, assumed the primary formula was already complete and market-ready. In February, David proudly announced to the financial press that Vance Biotech had successfully mass-produced the very first commercial trial batch of Aegis for Vanguard's independent technical testing panel. I sat quietly in my small apartment, opened a bottle of cheap whiskey, looked at the calendar, and patiently waited for the heat of summer to arrive. On May 28th, exactly 3 days before David Vance was scheduled to sign the $80 million buyout contract and retire as a celebrated industry legend, the sky came crashing down on his head. It began precisely at 8 o'clock in the morning. A massive convoy of unmarked black SUVs and heavy official EPA hazmat vehicles pulled forcefully through the main security gates of Vance Biotech. They were not arriving for a polite, scheduled inspection. Armed federal marshals instantly sealed all the building exits, while regional environmental enforcement officers, carrying a sweeping federal search warrant built on my unassailable technical evidence, marched directly for the hidden sub-basement of Lab 4. They did not just find a few old, forgotten leaking drums. They uncovered 94 unregistered, rotting barrels of deadly toxic solvent, sitting directly above a major underground freshwater intake that supplied the local town. As local news helicopters and investigative crews swarmed the perimeter fence, David panicked completely. He frantically called an emergency press conference in the main corporate lobby, sweating profusely under the lights, desperately trying to control the media narrative by claiming it was merely an isolated contractor error. That exact moment was when Vanguard Life Sciences received the urgent, independent lab test results from their trial batch of Aegis. Because David did not have Molecule 9, the summer heat during standard cross-country transport had turned the entire $10 million trial shipment into an inert, useless sludge. Vanguard did not simply cancel the $80 million acquisition. Their legal team publicly sued Vance Biotech for massive corporate fraud and breach of contract before the clock struck noon. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, while David was trapped inside his glass corner office, surrounded by screaming, panicked corporate lawyers and frantic PR advisors, his personal cell phone began to ring. It displayed a blocked number. He snatched it up on the second ring, his voice raspy, breathless, and hanging on the absolute edge of a complete psychological breakdown. He furiously demanded to know who was calling his private line. I spoke very quietly into the receiver, softly telling him hello, as I leaned back comfortably in my chair and watched the rain fall outside my window. There was a long, heavy, suffocating silence on the line. I could clearly hear his heavy, ragged breathing echoing over the speakerphone. David whispered my name, his once polished, commanding voice completely broken into pieces. He hysterically accused me of destroying his life, screaming and asking if I had any idea what I had done to him. He raged that he would use every penny he had left to sue me into the dirt, and ensure I rotted in a federal prison cell for the rest of my days. I told him calmly and softly that he could never sue me. I explained to him that in order to sue me for defamation or damages, he would first have to prove to a judge that I had lied. And every single piece of evidence the federal agents found that morning was written in his very own handwriting in his blue ledger, cross-referenced with 8 years of my verified lab data. David began to stutter uncontrollably. All of his artificial bravado and corporate arrogance instantly vanished, replaced by a pathetic, desperate, sobbing whine. He begged me to talk this over, wildly promising to put my name as lead inventor on the global patent, offering me 20%, then 30%, then 50% of all future royalties, whimpering that we could still work together and fix the degraded formula. I listened to him beg for a few moments, and then I softly quoted his own exact words back to him. I reminded him that assets get replaced, and that he was the visionary leader who had taught me that valuable lesson. Then, without waiting for a reply, I quietly hung up the phone. By the end of that fateful week, the federal court froze every single one of Vance Biotech's financial assets and bank accounts. The Department of Justice slapped David Vance with 14 severe felony counts of illegal hazardous waste dumping, environmental conspiracy, corporate racketeering, and high-level wire fraud. To cover the tens of millions of dollars in mandatory government cleanup fines and devastating civil damages awarded to Vanguard, David was forced to surrender everything and declare total personal bankruptcy. His grand hillside mansion was repossessed and foreclosed on. His collection of luxury cars was publicly auctioned off on the courthouse steps. His name, once revered in executive boardrooms, was dragged through every scientific publication and news outlet in the country as an exposed fraud, a toxic criminal, and a disgraced thief. 2 months later, the federal bankruptcy court placed the entire intellectual property portfolio of Vance Biotech on the auction block to settle its massive outstanding debts. With the financial backing of an ethics-focused medical investment firm that had carefully reviewed my original, uncorrupted research notes and verified my claims, I stepped in and bought the master patent for Project Aegis back, for pennies on the dollar. I immediately registered Molecule 9, officially filed the complete, working patent under my own name as sole inventor, and established my very own independent, worker-owned research laboratory. David Vance spent his entire life operating under the arrogant belief that his vast wealth, corporate titles, and social power gave him the divine right to crush and exploit the hard-working people beneath him. He forgot a fundamental truth of the world. He forgot that the dedicated, quiet people who build your empire from the ground up are the exact same people who know precisely which hidden pillar to pull to make the entire roof come crashing down on your head. True, meaningful justice is never about throwing an emotional tantrum or shouting in anger. It is about being patient, quiet, and methodical enough to sit back and let a greedy man build his own inescapable cage. If watching an arrogant, Abusive boss lose every single thing he stole gave you a deep sense of sweet, earned payback. Please hit that like button right now and drop a comment down below. What is the most satisfying moment of real-life justice or karma that you have ever witnessed with your own eyes? Do not forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss another deep dive story like this one. Until next time, stay sharp, stay patient, and protect your hard work.